this is something, this is a meeting that I personally have been waiting a long time for, because I have been worrying about the fact that what California does about climate is, some of it is in legislation, but a lot of it is in these little arcane administrative regulations that get passed to enact the regulations. And the technical stuff they build in there determines whether anything is going to work or not, or whether it's all going to be a bunch of greenwashing. And it's really hard for ordinary people to just untangle that and advocate around it. So I am extremely grateful to our speaker and the other people in the coalition that he works with, for leading the charge about this scoping plan. And I wanted to just read you a little bit about California Air Resources Board claims that what they're doing is developing a blueprint, a technologically feasible, cost-effective, and equity-focused path to achieve carbon neutrality by 2045 or earlier. That's what they say they're doing. It's called the Scoping Plan of 2022. And they're saying that the current plan goes beyond previous plans because it's not just about reducing greenhouse gases, it's also about absorbing, capturing and storing carbon, including through natural and working lands and mechanical technologies. And they claim further that this plan sets us on a course for a more equitable and sustainable future, including, there's a lot of rhetoric about equity, ensuring that those who benefit include the communities now hardest hit by the impact of fossil fuels, low-income communities of color. And there was the amazing language. The plan helps us chart the path to a future where race is no longer a predictor of disproportionate burdens from harmful air pollution and climate impacts. So that all sounds so wonderful. And then you start looking at the fine print. So that is why we needed our speaker to help us untangle what this scoping plan is, what its status is, how it relates to what actually happens in California, and the movement to make it actually do what it says it's doing. So, and we have with us, we are very grateful to have with us Francis Yang from the Sierra Club in Southern California, who's been one of the people leading this statewide coalition along with the California Environmental Justice Alliance to try to promote, as I said, a climate plan, a scoping plan that actually does what the language in the introduction says this one does, but doesn't. So what's the current status? What is this plan and what's wrong with it? And what are we doing about it? Francis.
Everybody. Yeah, thanks so much, Jean, for bringing me on. I just want to reiterate, I'm not going to take you through all the excruciating details of what exactly this multi-hundred page document is, but in reality, CARB is our state air regulators. Y'all may be familiar with your Bay Area Air Quality Management District. You can think of that as like the regional embodiment of the state regulator, which is CARB. And so what CARB does every 5 years is it essentially makes this long-term strategy and plan for the entire state across sectors that effectively is telling all of these polluters and all of these industries how much you're allowed to pollute in our state, by what time, and effectively what kind of technology. So as you can see, this is a really big deal because this reverberates far beyond legislation or executive orders. This is very much the directive of how things get done in the state. This is actually where a lot of your efforts, because it sounds like, from what I understand about your organization, that y'all have been engaged in plugging into very hyper-local work, but you've also been trying to engage in assembly bills and Senate bills. What I'm trying to tell you is that I'm not going to be here to debunk how everything moves together, but I can guarantee you that within the next year or two, after this CARB scoping plan is finalized by the end of 2022, our legislators our Bay Area Air Quality Management board directors, et cetera, will all be quoting CARB saying, well, this is what they said is ambitious, and this is what they say is feasible, whether you're talking about oil drilling, whether you're talking about gas storage, whether you're talking about the Port of Oakland, or you're talking about freeways and how many clean cars you get and what kind of grid you have. Like, these are all the components and smaller pieces of the larger scoping plan. I think it's fair to say that I don't need to, LARP on how critical environmental justice and the climate disaster is coming. We don't have very much time, which is why 5 years is a long time in the time frame that we need to really make dramatic changes, right? So that's why this CARB scoping plan, the 2022 CARB scoping plan, is now rallying the entire state. For the first time, effectively in CARB's history themselves, have they seen this amount of movement across the state. I'm talking about folks from the Inland Empire, where I organized a lot of the time, up to Kern County, Ventura County, Santa Barbara, Bakersfield, Fresno, Bay Area, Sacramento, and even some folks from very Northern California, like Humboldt, are all going to be coming to CARB on June 23rd to Sacramento, effectively to protest that the current plan that they've proposed is bullshit. It doesn't actually get us our climate goals, and it certainly doesn't eradicate the systemic problems of environmental justice in our state, which is very much why when Jean was describing, well, all these words about equity are nice, but the fine details actually are rather complicit. So I've said a lot about the context and the political landscaping and the movement. Maybe it might be more helpful for y'all to talk a little bit more about, like, well, what is in the CARB scoping plan? Does that sound good to everybody? Cool. Thank you for the 2 thumbs up, the nods. I appreciate it. Thanks, Andy. Just want to make sure we're on the same page. So there's a lot of things. Initially, I was actually going to bring up this massive, essentially this massive presentation that CARB has been presenting to us over the course of the last year and all their community workshops and their technical workshops. But really what I want to describe actually doesn't actually need very much visual reference. I hope we can keep this conversational, ask questions in the chat, whatever you need to do to help yourself understand this. And I'm happy to help. Effectively, CARB had created what we call 4 scenarios, alternatives, where they're saying, this is how the state can move by 2040. And these are the landmarks between 2025, 2030, 2035, all the very critical pieces that we need to know that we're moving in the right direction within the appropriate timeframe of climate catastrophe. And it's fair to say that alternative 1 and then regressively to alternative 4 are less ambitious. So alternative 1 is by far the most ambitious. And that is in a lot of, as you can imagine, what our partners had rallied around for the past year. We need alternative 1. It gives us a 100% clean energy grid by 2035. It more or less guarantees almost all of our heavy duty freight and drayage across our heavy duty transportation to be zero carbon by 2040. These are huge things. We're even talking about refineries becoming obsolete by the year 2045. Like, these are ambitious targets. And CARB had put in the work to show us that there is a path to do that. And then, as you can imagine, by alternative 2, that integrity starts to crumble. Alternative 3, even more so, and alternative 4 is just abysmal. We're just like, this is just like a fossil fuel plan. And so CARB staff then suggested formally and endorsed one of the scenarios. The scenario that they proposed was the most feasible, the most climate ambitious, and the most economically sound was alternative 3. Alternative 3 actually requires us to, I hate to use the word, but get more fossil fuels in the interim over the next 5 to 10 years. We would actually be having to build about 25 more electric power plants using natural gas. We'd actually have to be producing more diesel, biogas, natural gas to run our ports. The whole thing is just pretty, as you can imagine, we're just like freaking out. Like, is this a joke? Am I actually crazy? Or is this plan crazy? That's kind of where the conversation went. And so you can imagine this is why the movement has really come and coalesced around this thing where we're all saying, like, this is bullshit, right? And we're like, yes, academics, advocates and activists alike have resoundingly said this is ridiculous. How can we actually let this happen? How can we let this happen during an administration that's so clean energy? How can we let this happen in the face of wildfires in the summer? How can we let this happen in the face of a power plant exploding in the East Bay last year? All of this doesn't make any sense. And so what I'm here to tell you is that we're moving quickly. We have come up with very specific demands that is driving this cross-state coordination. And it's very simple, actually. Number one, we need a full and coordinated phase out of fossil fuels, with oil refining and drilling to be eradicated within the state by 2045. We need oil and gas extraction by 2035. So all the fracking and all the drilling out of California by 2035. Oil refinery, so all that stuff up in Richmond and over here down here in Carson and Wilmington and Long Beach, all of those refineries must be eradicated by 2045. So a decade after we stop producing our own oil and gas. And we need a 100% clean electric grid by 2035. As you can imagine, there are more sub-demands within these that are in more fine print, and I'll share them very soon in the chat. But for now, I want you to see, this is the high level of our ambition. These are the real landmarks and the high level goals we need to actually satisfy all these massive climate and equity values and pretty much directives of the climate movement today. The second demand is to accelerate and scale up investment in clean cars, trucks, and mass transit across California. This is, as you can imagine, much more complicated matter. But the reason why we call for this is because CARB is overwhelmingly still looking at not doing that. And so it's fair to say, well, this is an obvious one, but we need this in here because you've gone off the rails. And last but not least, we need to eliminate reliance on climate policy dead ends like carbon capture, utilization, and storage on polluting fuel sources. This one might seem a little weird and strange compared to the rest of the other two demands. And so let me clarify very quickly before you're like, what the hell is going on? Carbon capture is essentially technology that sucks the air and tries to pull carbon quite literally out. It's like a big vacuum, but at a trillion times more of a scale than your vacuum. And the goal of it is to capture the carbon that we've put out into the air and store it allegedly back into the earth, because that's what we did to fossil fuels. So it's like a reverse process. This is not a proven technology. In theory, you might say, oh, that's exciting. And quite frankly, I'm excited too. That would be an amazing thing if it worked. But the reality that we understand right now is that it doesn't work. It's not proven. And CARB has actually, in their modeling, relied on this unproven and scary technology to justify the need to expand our fossil fuel infrastructure. So that's why we're saying, hell no, there's no carbon vacuum we're going to allow if you're not going to be shutting down all these power plants, if you're not going to be transforming our transportation fleet, if you're not going to be keeping it in the ground, why would we ever allow you to build massive vacuums in our state? So I hope you see why that third one is so critical in these demands. Yeah, thank you so much. This is probably a really good time, Daniel, to put into the chat. So these demands were made actually in a much larger coalition. It's complicated, but the immediate coalition that we participate in is actually called Regenerate California. We work on clean energy across the state with the California Environmental Justice Alliance, who you all may know, CEJA, including Communities for Better Environment, who you all may know in Richmond, CCAJ, EJ Org in the Inland Empire, and CAUSE, another one in Ventura County. So that's our immediate coalition. But CEJA really rallied, I think it was over 200 organizations over the past year across the state, across so many coalitions, because the scope of CARB is now across all of our sectors. We're not just talking about clean energy. We're not just talking about oil refining. We're not just talking about asthma and children and educators. We're talking about the whole damn pie. So that's why these three demands came from, as you can imagine, an excruciating co-learning process and prioritization and deprioritization of what the hell we need from our state to be clear, to be unified, and to be consistent. And so these are our three demands. The website that I plugged into the chat is actually just made as of last week, I believe, for purposes just like what I'm doing, for y'all to get a little better glimpse at what is going on, what and who is really involved. Why are we talking about this? And why is everybody rallying? So I'm gonna throw in 2 action items now and probably pause to get some questions, and I can answer as freely as I can because I'm sure you have a million things to ask me. But the 2 action items, number 1, we are trying to do all hands on deck to Sacramento. We are busing people from Los Angeles, from Kern County, from Ventura to get up to Sacramento and show some support and love and hold these people accountable. Number 2, people are differently abled. I completely understand that. So I don't want anybody to feel pressure that they can't participate, but you can also be working in solidarity with us. We're also asking you to write a letter to CARB. You can do this on this website. It's at the very bottom of the page. You fill out your contact information and you can write them a haiku, or you can get really angry, whatever you want to do. But we're just asking that people just flood CARB because they've already started freaking out from the small mobilizations we've done. So we're trying to blow this up and really get them on their heels. So let me stop there. Sorry for talking so much. Steve, I see your hand. Did you want to ask me a question?
I did. Thank you for the presentation, by the way. That was excellent. So I'm going to ask what I think is going to be the real difficult, challenging question, and it's multi-part. First of all, is there any labor union buy-in to this coalition? 2, if so, is there any coordination with those unions that have supported the California Climate Jobs Plan, aka the Pollen Report? And this is probably the most difficult question. What is the plan for addressing what will be the inevitable stance of the building trades unions in favor of 3 or 4 or a worse option? And if there isn't a plan, I have something I wrote that might be helpful for that, which I'll drop in the chat.
Yeah, no, thank you, Steve. These are really important questions because you're really trying to get a sense of, well, like, where's the labor component? Where's the just transition component? Are we actually working together, or is this going to be another green versus labor, right? Like, that's the nature of the conversation. So actually what's been really cool, and I can say this not from very many things, and I'm not going to try to toot my own horn, but yeah, we actually did get some labor buy-in. We had talked to Teamsters unions. We had talked to the IBWs, so like the electrical workers. We'd even talked to some pipe fitters, but it's complicated. You had already named a big name, and I don't expect everybody to know this, but the building trades is a very powerful coalition of labor unions that know how to organize, and they're real good at doing it. And so I'm going to be real with y'all. We have a lot of locals who are really excited about this. And as you can imagine, they may say that it's because of climate, but we know it's because of their jobs. A lot of this requires a massive infrastructure build out at the scale that we're talking about is like the Green New Deal. That's the reality of it. So yeah, you can bet that there's a lot of unions that are excited for it. But it is a political nightmare to sign on in this kind of way and to sign on given how ambitious our demands are. But to better answer your question, Steve, than just say like, oh, do we get the stamp of approval or not? Because in a lot of ways, that's actually not the significant and meaningful parts of work. But yeah, we have a lot of labor unions that are really excited about this kind of work. They're really excited about what California must look like when we have a massive transportation overhaul where public transit is readily available across the state. We have massive labor interests when we talk about a 100% grid by 2035. 2035, they're very interested in that. But those same labor unions are in the same coalitions and trade networks as the folks who maintain and keep power in the fossil fuel industry. So it has been a nightmare, to say the least, to navigate the unions in a meaningful way without it feeling like backdoor deals. So that's why what we're saying is, and this is what I was told to say to everybody now, the labor piece will come because we're still working on it and we work closely with them, and it's always a negotiation. And there are people who are going to be mad, but they're always going to be mad. But the people who believe in this cause are definitely starting to line up their cards. And right now, California and the world is running out of time until that charade kind of ends. That's the best answer I can give you, Steve. I remember you asked me a couple other questions. Let me please know if you need me to answer anything more.
you got it, but I wanted to, I dropped a follow-up question in the chat, which you can answer offline so other people have a chance to talk.
Okay. All right. I have a follow-up question, actually, Francis. Is there any way, I know that you're right about all the people in the labor movement that are really into this. Is there any way for any of them to communicate any of that to CARB before they're ready to come full out in public?
So this is the tricky part, like there is, let me answer very shortly, there is.
Okay,
But what they will do is they will be very issue specific. I think that it would be political suicide if I was a union to sign on to, like, for example, like this massive statewide letter that y'all had signed on to with like 200 plus organizations. That would look like political suicide. What is not political suicide is, for example, if I were the Teamsters, and this is kind of what's been happening, and this is really how it works. If you would imagine me, the Teamsters, the trucking unions, and we want clean trucks. We really, really want those clean trucks. We're not going to come out and say California must get off oil refineries by 2045 and oil extraction by 2035. They're going to say, we need to see you put 100% clean, zero emission, heavy duty vehicles in the CARB scoping plan and nothing less. That's how they come out and advocate. So we're not going to necessarily be on all the same sign-on letters. That's right. And the rail workers who also benefit from that. Thank you so much, Steve. You know a lot. So that's how that actually plays out. So this is now how we describe hyperlocal fights, because they're far more issue specific. Right now, this is not the scale that I'm talking about. If I was a Bay organizer, I may be able to instruct you a lot better than I can. Remember, I'm in Los Angeles, apologies. But what we're talking about is the state. And so unfortunately, I can't say like I can give you any actionable for those unions, because that's not how it would play out. You would have to get a lot more ingrained into the kind of organizing that y'all do. Very local, very issue specific. And those components are the avenues you advocate at CARB. Yeah, sorry. I am also trying to read the chat at the same time.
that's very encouraging. Okay, Jan? You're muted.
Yeah. Sorry. Hi. Yeah. Thanks a lot, Francis. I just want to. It's very encouraging that this is statewide. And I was on listened to a joint ledge session with the Assembly Natural Resources and the Senate EV Quality Committee. And although it was focused somewhat on the carbon sequestration, and the full committee was in and out for other meetings. Leadership was really pissed with CARB. They're not happy with CARB because they are focusing on 2045, not giving any leadership or instruction about how in the world are we going to meet 2030, which is a real problem right now. And so we might have some opportunities to actually engage our leadership on some of these committees that have real questions about the way CARB is acting right now, and the fact that the one guy in particular, Dolly, I didn't know he's a Republican, but he was saying, I hear from this group and I hear from that group, and I don't know what's true. I don't know what's real, what's factual. All I ever hear about is jobs, jobs, jobs. And so he says, we're trying to do the right thing. So there's a lot of, the old fear and pressure stuff we always hear, but I think we really do all need to show up en masse, and we need to really push on this. Thanks.
Jan, I have a question about that. Is there some list of legislators that would be especially important to pressure at the moment?
Legislators will wait. If you're
Okay.
talking about board members who are the immediate decision makers in this process.
Yes.
Sorry. If you were thinking about that, then yeah, I got a whole list for you. And it's gonna start actually with the people who represent you. This is the part that I was really excited to talk about. beyond the rally, beyond the letters that you can sign, everybody has their place. Everybody has their representative. Everybody has their person that's directly accountable to them, right? Because God knows the government is accountable for all people in California. So we got to break it down better. So by design, CARB is composed of so many different kind of appointees. And the way that there's an appointee that represents y'all in the Bay is actually through the Bay Area Quality Management District. And so you actually have a solid advocate, Davina Hurt. Y'all might remember her. Davina Hurt is awesome.
Yeah.
But she needs to hear more.
Right.
We have to always think about it like this. We've been having lobby visits for so long. Davina Hurt just kind of sits there and says, I feel for you. I just don't know enough. And it's not just because she's being careful. We believe her, but it's because if we're just starting to show up and she's just learning about this because we're talking to her, imagine all the companies that have millions and billions of dollars to spend who has blown up her email for the past 3 years about this CARB scoping plan. And we just started last year. So when we say like, yes, reach out. And I'm super happy to walk y'all through this, set up board meetings and support y'all with talking points, brief some of y'all so that we can have deep dives and y'all feel comfortable doing this. But yes, there are ways that you can immediately talk to someone like Davina Hurt, who's a critical player in this landscape, and move her and educate her to show the love and the advocacy that you don't do this, you're gonna get the flames. That's essentially the game, right? And so yeah. If y'all want to talk strategy like that, I'm happy to send over a quick email to Jean afterwards so that I can give you kind of like a scoping of other folks that you can talk to that might be more flexible with your time as well. I hope that helps.
Do you have the petition to put in here as well from Sierra Club or from the coalition? The sign on?
Yeah, let me, I had a, let's see, oh shit. I thought I did. I have it somewhere on my computer. I just have.
I just chatted it in, Jean. Yeah,
Okay,
it's on
great.
the same website that I chatted in. And then if you scroll to the bottom, oh, it's not the bottom. That was a lie. I'm so sorry. If you scroll down just a little bit, it'll say take action. You can write a letter to CARB. That's essentially the sign on.
Okay. I'm also gonna put, I'm going to put another thing in the chat, which is a list of other resources that will be useful in knowing more about this in the future and in following up. So that it is resources and links that I just put in the chat that you might just want to copy so you can have that set of resources and links later. And that includes a link to the Sunflower Alliance post, which in turn includes a link to the petition and to another petition, several petitions that are about this. Okay. Yeah, but that's a wonderful offer, and we will totally take you up on that, Francis. And talk about how we can pressure the local Bay Area people. Anybody else?
So if we want to provide our own comment during public comment on Zoom, for example, do you recommend that we just go down the line of the coalition's demands? Are there particular messages that you think individuals should be trying to convey?
There are talking points if that's what you're asking for, and there will be a mobilization, an opportunity to call into the cardboard meeting. But believe me when I tell you, you're gonna wish that you were in person when you're on that phone, because there's gonna be a lot of people in Sacramento, so you're gonna be on the phone for a while. Number two, in terms of the immediate talking points and the how-tos, there will be a talking points guide that we're currently drafting it and finalizing. You can imagine the bureaucracy behind doing that with so many organizations involved, but we are finalizing that as of this week. I will be very sure to follow up with that so that you won't feel lost. And the last point that I'll make about that, Annie, is that as an organizer who started doing this work as a volunteer, I feel very strongly that you should tell your story and speak from your heart. If you want to incorporate this demand, please feel free to do so in solidarity. But, you know, yeah, you should make it your own. Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt. There's one thing that I did want to share really quickly. I know I won't be able to present it, but oh, do you think it'd be okay? Janet, do you think it'd be okay if I could share my screen really, really quickly, just for 1 second?
Give it a try, yeah.
Sweet, thank you so much. I was finally able to dig it up. You should be able to see my screen. Please ignore all my tabs. That is my life. If you look at this, this is what I'm talking about between the 4 alternatives. And you'll see to the right, alternative 1, 2, 3, and 4. So when you look at the actual, okay, yeah. So obviously at the bottom, the x-axis is the years. We're going all the way out to 2050. That's how far the modeling is going in the CARB scoping plan. We're talking about effectively the long-term of California's energy portfolio. And then along here on the y-axis, this is actually the million metric tons of carbon dioxide. And what we are at right now is about 85. That's where everybody starts. But it's about where we go and how soon we get there. You'll see in alternative 1, the most aggressive one is that cliff. We get to 0 emissions by 2035. That is what we want. That is our demand. 0 emissions by 2035. The EPA said it, even Biden said it. Like, that's actually the climate resilience goal. And then, as you can see in red, this is alternative 2. Never reaches 0, but it stays at 30 million metric tons. That's not great. We would fight that still. But what they offered was alternative 3. Alternative 3 stays at 40 million metric tons and flatlines at the year 2030. It doesn't get any better. And so when we're saying this is bullshit, what we're pointing to is a graph like this that says, and you think this is acceptable in a climate change world. We have to really like stay grounded in that. Alternative 3 is by no means any guarantee of safety. Alternative 3 is a guarantee of how the status quo is now. It's really terrifying. So that's all I really want to share. I'm sorry I didn't get to share that in a more timely way at the beginning, but I finally dug it up and I thought I'd share it with y'all.
Francis, I wonder if you would talk specifically about the environmental justice problems with the plans that they're advocating. Because I know that that's an important aspect of what's wrong with it.
Yeah, I think there's 2 major ways that you can talk about this in terms of the CARB scoping plan. Environmental racism is the infrastructure, so we can't really talk about it without talking about environmental justice. That's the first part. The actual overwhelming structural and high level outlook is like, well, this is all still rooted in environmental racism. When we talk about clean energy, overwhelmingly, we're talking about environmental justice communities that bear 70% of gas plants across California. When we talk about stopping oil drilling by 2035, we're talking about how 80% of that exists within low-income communities across California. When we talk about oil refineries, we're talking about 95% of them existing in environmental justice communities. So there's the high-level structural part. The second way that we talk about it are the immediate demands, the nuances, the increments, the prioritizations. So when we say we want to see clean energy by 2035, and the prioritization of environmental justice communities to have their power plants retired by 2030, that's the second way we talk about it. Those second ways have been shot down since the second we set them. So when we say this is not an equitable plan, and there's an environmental justice advisory committee structurally a part of the CARB scoping plan, and they have been shut down since day 1, we are saying this is not an equitable plan. It is so hard to say that without screaming, but I hope you feel what I'm saying. It's bullshit. Let's let them know. Like, that's all I can say. We got to take action. We got to let them know this is all bullshit. And so in both ways of equity, it is miserably failed. So we might as well turn the narrative, right? Instead of being mad at these people who aren't going to be on our side anyway, let's turn up the heat and show what power looks like. I hope I answered your question, Gene.
Do you have the answer to the question about the attribution for the chart? Somebody asked in the chat who's the source of the chart in order to share it.
The source of the chart is from CARB themselves.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, the source is CARB. What I can do, and Gene, I did this very briefly with you too. What I'll do is I'll follow up with all of y'all. Since it sounds like y'all really want these resources faster than I was able to give them to you. I'm really sorry about that. But I'll include the chart that'll give you a very high level. And if you want to be an energy wonk, like some folks on this call already know, you can dive deep into that. Number two, I'll include the website of the rally and of the SEAHA overall statewide work. And that'll also give you another kind of like more accessible contextual way to understand the work at CARB. And then number three, I'll include some rudimentary talking points so that you can also have a sense of like, well, here's at least the things that I do need to hit when I talk about the state and CARB. Does that sound good for everybody?
That's absolutely wonderful. We will get all of that stuff out.
Perfect. Yeah,
Um,
the CARB website's crazy. Be careful.
Yes. I have lots more questions. I'm just going to keep asking questions unless I see somebody else's hand. Okay. You had mentioned, and one of the first things I saw from your coalition was about how the plan 3 calls for new gas plants for electricity. Is that how could they do that?
Yeah. So of all the sectors in the CARB scoping plan, the electricity sector, you can say, is the one that got hit the hardest. And you can actually say that about the electricity sector in California for quite some time. And the reasoning goes like this. No matter how you look at it, and even some of the most conservative estimates and predictions for California, by 2040, we will have about triple our energy or our electricity demand. And that's not just because of how much more energy we use per capita, the fact that we're on our computers instead of a meeting right now as an example, to our smartphones. And then we think about things that take a lot of energy, like plugging in your vehicle to the grid and decarbonizing your building off of gas stoves. And God knows I love gas stoves and cooking, but we all know that's gonna go because the climate depends on it. As we think of decarbonizing across sectors, what that does, and this is why I call the grid the skeleton of our civilization, it gets plugged back into the grid. The grid takes the load. And in this case, and as you can imagine, the status quo would be, well, you just shifted the pollution burden from your tailpipe out the smokestack. And that's why when we say CARB is freaking out because they're thinking that we're not going to have a reliable energy grid, we got to build new power plants. And there's so many ways that I can respond but before everybody gets up in arms about it, I want to be very clear. California does have an electricity reliability problem. All y'all are PG&E customers, you feel me. There's a reliability problem. But the way to go about that is certainly not by building the thing that brought us here in the first place. The thing that we need is a very resilient, well-coordinated, and distributed grid. We're talking about local solar. We're talking about local projects. We're talking about local battery. We're talking about people who have a sense of fluency and an ability to coordinate at scale in time our energy needs and demands. A power plant does not do that. A power plant takes about 12 hours to turn on. Did you know that? It takes 12 hours to turn on. It takes about 8 hours to turn off. That is not a fast thing to do. So when we are saying, and what we tell CARB is, this is crazy. Even the California Public Utilities Commission, the California Energy Committee, or what was it? The California CC and CAISO, all of the actual agencies that do the clean energy work only have even been telling CARB, we don't think your modeling is correct.
So are you demanding no new gas power plants?
We're not just demanding no new gas power plants, we're demanding the retirement of existing ones,
Okay.
starting with environmental justice communities. And beyond just the moral demand, we have real grid experts from UC Berkeley, from UCLA, even from the federal EPA who have told us this is insane. we've been advocating for clean energy in the state for over 12 years now, my campaign. And the science has been more or less consistent from 12 years ago. We have been ready to retire power plants. This is not a matter of science anymore. This is a matter of political will, which is why I hate this question sometimes, because as you can imagine, we can do it. It's crazy that we can do it. It's just the fact that we're not doing it. And we're being told CARB presentations that we need to build more power plants insane. Yeah, my sanity really suffers when I hear that.
So, but that makes me think of, I mean, so are the oil companies just like paying people off? How did they get them to do this?
I'm so sorry. I feel like I've been talking so much. I would even love to hear what other people think to answer that question. Yeah, I think.
Okay,
I
Steve.
give good guesses.
Steve, you
No.
want
Yeah, I will respond to that. And I apologize if I sound like, a boilerplate rhetoric spouting Marxist here, but I think it really comes down to the fact that this plan inevitably is going to cut into some very substantial profit margins, particularly from the fossil fuel capitalists, but others as well. And they are never going to let us take that away from them without a bloody fight. And so, yeah, they're going to lobby heavily, and they've already been doing this for over a century. WISPA is one of the most powerful lobbying organizations in all of the world. I mean, not to mention California. Dan Bacher has written very extensive exposés about them in Red, Blue, and Green, the Daily Kos, and other publications for years on end, just how much WISPA greases the wheels in Sacramento. Furthermore, this is going to require a massive redistribution of wealth. It's not just going to affect the fossil fuel industry, it's going to affect a lot of other big businesses as well. They do not want to see this vast redistribution of wealth because it affects their profit margins. And here's where the boilerplate Marxism comes in. Capitalism doesn't allow even the capitalist to have enlightened views because it's all based on short-term profit. It has its internal logic. And even if you were a CEO and wanted to do the right thing, you just get replaced by the shareholders who expect a return on their investment. So
Okay.
yeah, they do this.
right? Okay. I was thinking of something a little more specific, but never mind. Yes, Daniel.
Thanks. I just wanted to pass on some concrete sort of, I guess, intel because some Extinction Rebellion members and I went up to a different CARB hearing last week for electric vehicles. And so there were a couple of things that we learned from that. I'm not sure that this hearing on June 23rd will be in the same room, but if it is, then like there's really like very minimal security. They're not even asking for ID. So the possibility of like bringing in a banner or something like that, to do something in the room, it's very possible. Very crucial piece of information. This rally last week was organized by the Center for Biological Diversity. It was about the electric vehicles hearing, and they were having a rally outside like right beforehand. And so they were all having a rally and they missed the opportunity to sign up first early on the list of speakers. So it was like the first 10 speakers were by car companies. And it turned out being fine. It was like we heard what the companies said, but that seemed like it was not a strategic choice. So I think that for folks coming up on June 23rd, like it's very key to get in there early and like sign up like for a speaker slot. They were doing this back and forth thing where they were taking people in the room and then going to calls. Back and forth. And I sort of assume that they'll do the same thing, but I don't know that for sure. So yeah, I just wanted to say those things, Francis, so that you could pass them on to the folks coming up potentially, and then also to just the folks who are who are here on this call who might be going up. Thank you.
Thanks so much for the information, Daniel. I'll definitely forward some of that information. I appreciate that a lot. Jean, I can answer your question really quickly, like, I guess, like concretizing what Steve had said.
Yeah, I mean, I understand about capitalism, but I want to know how they do it.
Let me share my screen very quickly. This will be fun. These are the 14 voting members of the California Air Resources Board. 40 people is a lot on a board. As you can imagine, like any place, there's seniority, there's fields of expertise. There are advocates like Diane, who comes from CEJA. And you also have people like Daniel Sperling, who's like the automotive member, to your point, Daniel. Like, this is the dude who advocates for those companies. How did he get there? It is structural. But then you also have people like John, who is a physician member and clearly advocates very strongly for public health. But then just as clearly, you have people like Barbara, who is from Mojave Desert AQMD, who battles with Davina Hurd all the time about what a just and clean energy policy for clean air looks like. These conversations happen in real time. And the point of me sharing these faces is not only to show you that these people are real and that there are ways that you can read up on them, and this is where I stop sharing my screen, but also to say that the political warfare at the board level is also very present. It is not like they don't always go without a fight. But if folks like us are not showing up to support our Gideon Krakovs or Davina Hertz, but, you know, Daniel Sperling, who represents the automotive members, always has his fuel because those car companies are talking to him all the time, giving him fuel, giving him motivation to do this work, then yeah, that's how it plays out. So this is our opportunity to say, let's turn the tables. No one was expecting a statewide network to turn out. They might have been expecting a couple of us, the usual players. But let's say, and this is kind of the image I have in my head and what makes me really excited. Let's say that some of our volunteers from the Inland Empire and from South Los Angeles come up and we're coming together in the same room as y'all from the Sunflower Alliance and saying the same damn thing and chanting the same thing, and person after person, holding them accountable and putting their feet to the fire. I mean, you know, they can only thumb on their phones for so long before they just have to sit there in agony and take it. And that's the point right now. The actual technical expertise and the recommendations and those assessments are very real, and they've been fighting for way too long. That is not the thing that's failing. What is failing is that our decision makers don't have the ammunition to do the right thing. This is our way to bust the door open. And I hope you see that very clearly in this rally. I also want to acknowledge the time, Jean and Janet. I know, I'm so sorry I hijacked like so much of your
No,
meeting. I just wanna hand it
This
back.
is what we wanted you for, because you know all this stuff that we don't know, and it's really helpful for us to be able to grill you. I have another question unless somebody else, I have an endless supply of questions, but I don't want to. Okay. Years and years ago, like many years ago, we had a public forum on what was wrong with cap and trade. And basically it lets polluters buy credits so that they can keep on polluting. And they don't have to reduce their carbon dioxide emissions. They can also increase toxic emissions in the neighborhoods around them, which are low-income communities of color. So does this new scoping plan retain basically the same model of cap and trade, or does it change it at all, or what?
There's certainly less reliance on cap and trade. That part is still to be determined. And I wish I knew a little bit more about the actual ins and outs of that, Gene, but this is where I'll show my humanity and say, like, I don't know as much, but I do remember the researchers and the attorneys talking about trying to take out a lot of the cap and trade processes within the CARB scoping plan, in particular for the short term and the midterm, so that we can actually more so focus on building clean energy sources and retiring polluting sectors. So that's why that was kind of like the move. It's like less cap and trade, more direct action.
That's good news as far as it goes. Okay. And also, okay, yeah, Kathy, Kathy's raising a thing about offsetting. That's the other thing, that's another thing I was gonna ask you about, that, I am very nervous about all the talk about absorbing carbon in natural and working lands, even though it's a wonderful idea and should happen, because I'm afraid they're gonna do it with offsets. Like they're gonna let polluters keep emitting greenhouse gases somewhere else on the theory that that's okay because we'll plant a tree and it'll suck up carbon dioxide. Is there, in the discussions about natural and working lands, are they including any of the offsets? Or is offsets a part of that model?
I actually don't know. I don't know about the offset conversation. I haven't actually really even seen it come up. But if it makes you feel any better, we're talking about the hard numbers that any person in the state would be able to access air quality indexes and pollution sources. So in my opinion, it might not really matter because as long as that meter is still reading at 85 million metric tons of carbon dioxide, it doesn't really matter how many trees that they plant. But I understand
That's
that
great.
I'm not happy understanding the offset conversation. So I'm sorry, I won't be able to help any more than that.
That's okay. We'll follow up about offsets later because that's, I mean, there's a bill right now in the legislature about natural and working lands. Maybe Valerie wants to talk about that.
Well, what I wanted to talk about, and I don't know the specifics. I want to acknowledge that up front, Jean. But one of the things we've heard is CARB has turned natural and working lands into an overall source of emissions. So they're not even using them as a sink because they are so convinced that wildfires are going to turn our natural and working lands into an overall, a net source of CO2. They haven't built it in this way. And in fact, that's one of our concerns is we don't agree with that. So they flipped one thing on its head. So what else is new?
You mean they're not counting, but their introduction talks about natural and working lands as a carbon absorption thing, but you're
Right,
saying.
they talk about what it should do, but that's not how they're modeling it.
Right.
That's astonishing.
Yeah.
Jan,
Yeah, I just wanted to add, back in 2017, when the 398 bill on AB or SB, but when we lost the cap on the CO2, that at the same time, they extended the cap and trade to 2030. So, it's still operative till then.
right. Okay. Okay. So anybody?
So we're about to lose Francis. And I just had one question for Francis, and that is in the run up to the Sacramento rally and showing up at CARB on the 23rd, what would you like us to do other than publicize on social media, our website, etc.? Is there, will you be sending out a, one of those media kits or etc.? What more can we do?
This is how you know I'm really bad at social media. Yeah, so I just put into the chat. I just got roasted by one of my coworkers saying like you need to be better at social media. So thank you for that, Janet. I just put it into the chat. This will be the 4th item now on the follow-up email I'll plan to write right after I fall off. But this document I just posted in has like the Twitter handles, I think, or is it Instagram? I also don't even know that, but you can follow them on the social medias that the kids like. That's what I'm saying right now. But there's also some like draft tweets, I believe, and some draft Facebook and Instagram posts as you want. If you're savvy to that, please do that. My cheat sheet is follow the orgs and just like screenshot and then do it and just make your life easier. And then the one thing that I will say is that if they're targeting, for example, Leanne Randolph, who's the chair, or Gavin Newsom, or the California Air Resources Board, that's the thing of anything you need to remember to tag them in your posts. Because what's the point if they're not feeling the heat, right? We got to make sure that they know that regular people are now starting to comprehend the scope of the scoping plan. And yeah, let's just make that very clear. Thank you so much for that, Janet. I really have to hop.
Okay, thanks so much, Francis, for.
Thanks so much,
Thank you.
everybody. Have a good Sunday and stay cool.